Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Cordone, and I'm a sophomore in the lead class of 2025 studying music education. In the future, I hope to become a music teacher at an elementary school. I'm honored to welcome you all to the Hartford College for Women class of 1970 speaker series. The Women's Advancement Initiative continues and celebrates the legacy of Hartford College for Women. As a lead student, I proudly walk in your footsteps. I would like to start tonight's event by reading two poems. The first is entitled Sisters by Rupi Kaur. On days I could not move, it was women who came to water my feet until I was strong enough to stand. It was women who nourished me back to life. Next, I'd like to share Sadie and Maud by Gwendolyn Brooks. Maud went to college, Sadie stayed at home. Sadie scraped life with a fine-tooth comb. She didn't leave a tangle in, her comb found every strand. Sadie was one of the livingest chits in all the land. Sadie bore two babies under her maiden name. Maud and Ma and Papa nearly died of shame. When Sadie said her last so long, her girls struck out from home. Sadie had left as heritage her fine-tooth comb. Maud, who went to college, is a thin brown mouse. She is living all alone in this old house. This poem describes that as women, we all take different paths in our lives and leave our own legacies, which is what makes our sisterhood so unique. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gina. And I would like to, my name is Amy Jaffe Barzak, and I am proud to be the executive director of the Women's Advancement Initiative. And we are very proud to continue and celebrate the legacy of Hartford College for Women, especially for today's women students. I want to start by thanking the Hartford College for Women class of 1970 planning committee. Back in just before the pandemic, they were working hard to plan their 50th reunion. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And this extraordinary committee, Jan Zaleski Klein, Rebecca Friedman Danchek, Linda Kotz Macy, Shirley Zelinka Buckham, and Cindy Gilpin Winters came together and said, well, okay, the pandemic means we can't meet in person, but what could we do? And they started monthly happy hours, then programs, then speakers, and now this book series. So I want to thank them for the joy of working with you and just what fun we've had together over the last couple of years. I want to say that the Women's Advancement Initiative really is genuinely proud to celebrate and continue the Hartford College for Women legacy. And when we developed the LEAD program for students, the design of it was inspired by the way Hartford College for Women students were challenged and supported. You are going to love tonight's book. I've been reading it every day at lunch and loving it. Thank you, Diana, for writing such an outstanding book. Now I'd like to introduce Diana Ross McCain, who is our author. And after that, I'll introduce moderator Mari Ferkatian. So Diana Ross McCain is an independent historian who has been researching, writing, and speaking about Connecticut and New England for the past 30 years. She was on the staff of the Connecticut Historical Society for 25 years. Since 2015, she's also been a partner in Come Home to Connecticut, an enterprise which offers historical and genealogical research services. I think you are going to love hearing about this book, and Diana, we are delighted that you were able to join us tonight. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Mari Ferkatian, who is a professor of history at University of Hartford's Hillier College. She teaches Western civilization and global history. She earned her PhD in history and her master's degree in Slavic languages from Indiana University. Dr. Ferkatian is also part of the Women's Advancement Initiative's Laura Johnson Leaders Program. And this program for faculty and staff was inspired by the way faculty and staff at Hartford College for Women were both a community and supported and empowered each other. So I want to say thank you for being with us this evening. I also want to just briefly thank Elizabeth Abbey, who was part of alumni engagement years ago and helped the class of 1970 reconnect with each other. So I will turn the podium, if you will, over to Dr. Mari Furkatian.
Thank you, Amy, so much. Thank you for the warm welcome. And thank you all for joining us. I especially want to thank the Hartford College for Women alumni and the lead students who have worked so hard to create this wonderful event. And of course, I want to thank Diana Ross McCain for joining us today, who will be speaking about her book. We're here tonight because we have a connection. We're committed to empowering women and celebrating those historical women before us that left a legacy, educating our current students and appreciating the future generation of women leaders and entrepreneurs. Diana, in the spirit of sisterhood across time and between Hartford College for Women alumni and today's students, I'm wondering if you can share with us why you are so passionate about research and writing, and specifically shining a spotlight on a pivotal historical movement, especially those that are providing equal education for women and the abolition of slavery.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I have always loved history. I've always found it fascinating. And I think what's so important to realize is that these are people who they're the same as we are, just living in a different set of circumstances, and can learn so much from that, especially about women, of course, have gotten short shrift in history for a long, long time. And you can learn about what life was like for them, the challenges they faced, how people not unlike us dealt with a much different world, especially the women. So that's just what I've always found fascinating, is just somebody like you and I who is dealing with, a completely different set of circumstances.
So before we start talking about the book, Thy Children's Children, can you share your story about the decision to write the book? What's your reason for writing it? And perhaps share a little bit about what were some of the challenges of writing this wonderful book.
Well, as I said, I've always loved historical fiction, good historical fiction that's based on a real story, on research. And so I think that's incredibly educational, and it can also open up to read something in fiction, and then you think, wow, I'd like to know more about that. So that's really what it did for me. And I had always wanted to write something like that. And then I moved to Connecticut from Ohio 40 some years ago. And I lived near Lyman Orchards, okay? And you drive by every day, and there's a sign that says, since 1741, which I say is like catnip to a historian. So I got involved with working some history with them, and then I just thought, this story is so wonderful. It's so fascinating. It has so much going on, the characters, the events that take place, that it was really just perfect grist for a historical novel, the kind that I really, really enjoyed. So that was what really sort of inspired me. And also part of it was, it happened right here. So everything that not everything, but most everything in the book, it happens right here. You don't have to imagine, you don't have to whatever. So I loved that part of it too. And the challenges were just finding, well, the research, certainly. I did a lot of this pre-internet age, okay? So I'm like writing to people in Georgia, asking for research, or so that made it difficult as well. And then just the whole concept of, I said, it sort of laid out a plot. I had a plot laid out because I was following what happened. I couldn't send people off to China or put them in a duel because that didn't happen to these people. So I sort of had that thread plot laid out for me. But then I had something that I really would have to explain or get involved with. Like, about an event, how were the characters reacting? What was the dialogue? So those were some of the real challenges.
Yes, I suspect I've shared some of those challenges myself. So, you have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in history, and you have a master's degree in library science. Certainly, the background helps you writing the books. Would you like to share with us what inspired you first to become an author of nonfiction? And specifically, would you care to give some advice to the students that are listening to us tonight?
I sort of, shall I say, fell into writing. I worked on my college newspaper and then worked as a newspaper reporter for a while when I got out, and then went to work at the Connecticut Historical Society. And there I was surrounded by this just untapped gold mine of wonderful history and stories. And so I wrote articles for magazines and such for newspapers. And then I really just was sort of, Globe Pequot Press asked me if I would do a book on it happened in Connecticut. And I said, okay. So that really sort of got me doing books. And I did 4 or 5 nonfiction. But as I said, I'd always really wanted to do something, historical fiction, something that would really be able to speak in a way that you can't do. You can't do history if you're chained to the facts, if I hate to say that.
Well, reading the book, I had this real sense that you tried and succeeded in bringing out the achievements of the women. So would you like to comment on some of those contributions of Lyman women?
Well, I think they're representative for the most part of everyday women, okay? It's a story of 5 generations of a family who live on the same farm for 5 generations. They're still there now, the 9th and 10th generations. Lymans have been on their land for 280 years, which is pretty amazing. And so it isn't that you had women who were necessarily doing major things that would get written up in history books, but just the lives that they led and their, the roles they filled were really, really, I think, significant. Again, the kind of thing that doesn't get paid attention to. For example, simply, day-to-day living 250 years ago for everybody was just horrendously difficult. We can't even imagine, really. The idea that you had to make everything by hand, had to raise your own food. You were having, usually if you're a woman, you were like pregnant or nursing most of your life. And that was all very dangerous. So just those challenges, I think, being able to have to deal with those and see how they dealt with is pretty amazing. And I think, as I said, I think a lot of women, this was the typical for women, and I don't know that they really get enough credit for it.
No, I agree. I think reading their lives and their everyday struggles, I often had the thought, would I be able to do this if I were in their shoes? And it was an incredible ordeal just to survive. Never mind scaling great heights of anything.
Right.
So that was well. It was really impressive, their accomplishments. So we know that the Lymans fought in the American War of Independence. Would you like to comment? I know you do in the book, but would you comment on how the family crusaded against slavery, and then perhaps something about how they created advances in industry in the colonial period and post-Civil War as well? Well,
the family is, yes, there's a couple of the members actually went to war and fought in the revolution. But again, it's that sort of who was taking care of everything back on the home front? Who was raising the food, making the clothes, all of that kind of stuff. And that's what the women were doing, the Lyman women were doing during that time. Then when you get to the abolition of slavery, that's the 3rd generation of Lymans, William Lyman and his wife Alma, were very, very involved in the abolition movement. And what I think it's important to realize, and again, I think there's a whole lot of history that back on and think, oh, it's not that. But to be an abolitionist in Connecticut or the Northeast before the Civil War, it was a radical thing. People thought that abolitionists were radical crazies who wanted to tear the country apart with their weird idea of emancipating slaves. So to do that, to speak out publicly about that, was very dangerous. And William Lyman did, and Alma was right there supporting him. She was, with him. So it's not that they were, this is not, one of the big names or whatever, but these are people who are like doing the grassroots work of trying to make sure that, slavery is eliminated eventually. So I think it was working as a team, the two of them together. They really made advances towards eliminating slavery.
Yes, it's an incredible family. I mean, certainly they've accomplished, as you noted, they've been in the same land for 280 years. So, but they begin as, any ordinary family with the same desires and the same dreams. And we probably shared many of the same dreams. After all, we've all had some of the same challenges, but given what they went through and given the kinds of struggles they overcame, have you drawn anything from their experiences that you can say can give us today's women some kind of instruction on how to be equally resilient?
I think to be honest, it might have just been a case of they didn't have a choice. Okay, you were faced with things and you simply had to deal with them. You needed food. You had to prepare food. You needed whatever you needed. You had to do. There was no option of, I think I'll just step back from all of this. There is a lot of importance of community and of other women. Okay. Involved in helping you out with this, especially with women for things like childbirth and childcare. So that's relying on other people, relying on the community that you have. I think really helped them get by. It really was a major part of what made it possible for them to keep going.
Thank you, Diana. Diana, would you mind speaking a little closer
Sure.
to your speaker? Because sometimes you're fading in and out. And I mean, it's not we just don't hear you completely.
Okay.
So you write about courtships and critical alliances. Can you tell us how these alliances or courtships presented or offered opportunities to Lyman women?
Well, I get the feeling that most of the relationships were voluntary and affectionate. This was a time when marriages were sometimes made for financial advantages or whatever. But I get the sense that for the Lymans, that was not the primary concern. And you do find that depending on who you married, of course, that's good. Because remember, this is back when you get married, everything you own becomes your husband's. Everything you own automatically. The two become one and the one is the man. So they were involved with the women. Who they married mattered a lot. And that also meant that they had to go with the ups and downs of who they married. One of my favorite characters is Hope and John Lyman were the couple who first came from Durham, Connecticut to Middlefield, Connecticut in 1741. And there's so little to build on, but you take these little bits and pieces of information to sort of get a sense of her character. So she gets married, she's 19, marries young, but in 1741, they moved, they're a young married couple, and they moved to Middlefield and they buy land. One of the pieces of land they bought, Hope bought in her own name. Okay, this is when, again, everything you own is your husband's, but it's in her name. She signs it, it's sold to her. At the bottom, of course, it says she does this with the good liking of her husband, but she does it on her own. And that just sets something to me right there about this is a woman who's going to exert a certain amount of control, okay, in in her life, her marriage, I don't know. So you take little things like that and try and interpret what they were like. And there's a great story later on about when she was an older widow, okay, living, and her son, her kids are all grown up. And she was considering remarrying to a gentleman in town, next town over, North Guilford. But she was unsure whether she should do that because, as they said, she wondered how her son David would know to go to the mill if I went off. Which meant, how would he know to do his chores if I move away? David at the time was the 32-year-old father of 3. Okay, so again, this is a woman who's exerting control. She's had to exert control because she's found herself in tough circumstances. And you just get that sense of, a tough personality.
Well, my next question was going to be, who's your favorite Lyman woman? So would she be the one, or is there someone else?
No, actually my favorite, I was thinking about this, is Alma Lyman, who is on the cover of the book. That's her, she and her husband William are on the cover of the book. They're the 3rd generation of the family to live on Alma starts out, when she was a young woman, she was the oldest of all of the children in the family. So she obviously had to take a certain amount of responsibility. It was recounted that when she was spinning, a young woman with a spinning wheel, she would put a book on the spinning wheel so she could read while she was spinning. So this is a woman who obviously yearns for knowledge and education. She doesn't get the chance to go to school because basically there was nothing then. But her daughter, she and her husband William saw that their daughter Lizzie was able to go to some of the pioneering institutions in women's education in the 30s. The Hartford Female Seminary in Hartford was one of the first schools that taught women anything other than just the basics. Algebra, you would study geography and science and all of these things. And it had to take a certain amount of guts to send your daughter to do that. Because back then, everybody, it was, we know women's minds are not strong enough for this. They will collapse under the pressure of studying these kinds of things. And then the other was, you're just going to get married anyway. Why are you doing all this educating? So to be that forward thinking, to do that with your daughter, it's sort of like, I think, realizing something she dreamed about, and also looking forward to the next generation. This is what I want her to have.
So would you like to read a passage from the book for us? Maybe your favorite or one of your favorites? Probably like choosing your favorite child, but I don't know.
No. I think when we talked about this before, I said I wouldn't read it. Okay. But what's probably just my favorite little section of the book, and there is a spoiler here, so if nobody likes spoilers, put your fingers in it, is John and Hope Lyman had a daughter, Esther. Okay? Esther she got married when she was 19, which was typical for that time period. She married a blacksmith in New Haven by the name of David. Esther immediately gets pregnant. She also is suffering from tuberculosis, right? So she's not well. In October of 1775, she goes into labor prematurely. She has her baby 2 months early. She dies 2 days later of tuberculosis. So the story that was told about this is actually told by the baby in question. Okay, he says that he was told this story about when his mother gave birth to him. The midwife just sets the baby aside because she's so involved with taking care of the mother. And then finally, when she can look at the baby, she's surprised to see that he's still breathing. So she wraps him up and she says, it's too bad he didn't die with his mother. Okay, so this is the reality of life in the late 1700s. You have a premature baby if there's no mother. There's no neonatal unit formula. But his mother's sister, his aunt, took him and raised him. as her own. So that's again the sort of family, the community, the women, stepping in when there's a tragedy or a problem. The best part of this that I like, the baby, was Lyman Beecher. Lyman Beecher grew up to be father of Harriet Beecher Stowe. Okay? So if that baby hadn't lived, there would have been no Harriet Beecher Stowe, there would have been no Uncle Tom's Cabin. All of American history would have been different. And it all hinged on this little baby, premature baby, and being raised by his mother's sister. So I think I just like that story because it has so many. It has the family connection, it has the support, it has the tragedy of what we all pretty much take for granted these days, that have a baby in it. The lack of any kind of medical or technological. So it sort of wraps all of those things together, and it's based on his account. And this is he was told this story and he wrote it in his autobiography. So the facts are there.
Yeah, I was curious actually on that topic. Did any of the women leave any kind of personal accounts of their experiences?
One did. She was William and Alma's granddaughter, Kitty, who was Lizzie's daughter. She pretty much grew up with her grandparents. She was pretty much raised by her grandparents. And when she was an older woman out in Indiana, she wrote for, I think, some club she belonged to, a sort of just a memoir of growing up in the 1840s, 1850s in Middlefield with her family. And it's charming. It's got some pathos to it, and it's just it's more about daily life and how things went and their characters and their personalities. But it's really very very nice. Really evokes the era.
Right. And I was also curious if you would give us just a brief accounting of where exactly you researched the book. I mean, you mentioned briefly Georgia, but just a little bit.
Well, it really sort of started, this actually got started because some members of the Lyman family asked me in the 1990s to do a family history just for them, which I did. But I said, then I just realized this was the kernel of a novel. So there were some letters that are at like the Middlesex County Historical Society. The family has some. There were a couple different genealogies. This is where I'll sort of step into. Genealogy is like part of history. It is not the handmaiden of history. So you start with that, with what you've got about the family. And then it was basically researching any person. So if I wanted to know about someone, I would look at the vital records. I would look at the land records. I would look at the church records, because that was very important in their life. And the probate records. When somebody died, this is how somebody died back in the 1700s. They made a list of absolutely everything they owned, okay? Because everything had value. So you see like a bunch of rags. It's in the inventory because you don't just go down to Walmart and buy some rags if you need them. So all those kinds of things that you put together to see how it works. And then there's the background so that you know that what's the historical background that they're in, so that you don't have people doing things that women wouldn't have done back then. So that was another thing too, is sort of realizing the limitations on what people were allowed to do by society and by the law.
Right. And that's why I think it's important to, again, recall that that there were members of this family that they were willing to risk everything to be members of the Underground Railroad and help escaped slaves.
Right. That was, as I said, if you live in Connecticut, or actually the Northeast, anybody whose house is old and has like, oh, tunnel underneath or something, it's we're stopping the Underground Railroad, which is not probably true. Okay, there weren't nearly as many Underground Railroad sites as you would think, but the Lymans actually were. There's documentation that they were involved in the Underground Railroad, and they weren't quiet about it. Okay, so William Lyman, and again, Alma supported him in all of this. William Lyman was an outspoken advocate of abolishing slavery. He was attacked by a mob one time for it. And when they passed the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which was really sort of the tipping point that required if somebody came into Connecticut chasing their slave, you were required by law to help them. Okay, and if you didn't, you had broken the law. So this is just really outrageous. And William and his son and a couple other men published in two New Middletown newspapers their sort of manifesto against the Fugitive Slave Act, and they ended it by saying, "This pretended law we will not obey." So it's like, put a sign up over the house that says Underground Railroad. But they were not going to violate their principles.
Right. Diana, thank you so very much for sharing your book with us and your insights about the Lyman family. And I so enjoyed reading it. Thank you very much.
It's been great.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I apologize for my voice in advance. I'm a bit sick, but I'm hoping I can get through this. If you, for whatever reason, if it cuts out and or you can't understand me, please feel free to leave a note in the chat and I'll be more than happy to repeat myself. My name is Alyssa Hoffman. I'm a senior in the lead class of 2023, studying marketing. Post-graduation, I hope to land a job within the advertising agency realm with a continued focus on DEIJ and community engagement. I would like to thank Diana Ross McCain and Dr. Furkatian for their discussion. I would also like to send a special thank you to all of the Hartford College for Women alumni for attending and leaving a legacy for students like myself. Now I have a few more pre-submitted questions to ask from our audience. So
can I just start?
So we're going to run through a few questions that were already submitted, and I think we do have time for some more questions at the end.
Okay.
So the first question is both for Diana and Professor Furkatian. As you look back on your career journeys, what was the best piece of advice you ever received?
I'm not sure that I ever got a particular piece of advice. I think what was really great was I was allowed to pursue what I was interested in, okay? Follow whatever I thought was my direction. I majored in history and French, which were no more marketable when I majored in them than they would be now. But they were what I was interested in, and I pursued them. It wasn't like, I'm only going to be a starving historian and had it. But it was that freedom to just follow what I thought was interesting and see what I could make of it.
Oh, I believe you're on mute.
I just realized. Sorry about that. I'm not sure I received a great piece of advice either, but I do know that my dissertation advisor probably tried to help me despite myself when she directed me in a direction of research that in a language that I already knew. In other words, in grad school, it was very common for you to try to, power through learning another language and then do dissertation research in that language. And it's insanely difficult. So she did, and I really appreciate it in hindsight. What I do tell my students today is very basic stuff like, if you work on your assignments a little bit every day, you'll get through it. But if you leave it for the night before, it won't work out more than likely. So that's what I tell them. And generally I find that advice helps me get stuff done. So, yeah.
Great advice from the both of you. Another question about advice. Do you have any advice for students who are women who are in college and wanting to make an impact on the world?
Mm. Diana? Yeah.
I think, again, it's just sort of do what you think works for you. And also don't be afraid to try something. Okay. There's so much out there saying, oh, it's too hard, no, you can't do it. And the best example I can give you of that was when I started writing this novel. It was painful. I would put a sentence down on the computer screen and then I would be, oh, I can't even look at it. It's so awful. But nobody's going to see it but me until it's ready. So you have to get past that. Can I really do this? Is it good enough? Oh, it's so awful in the first draft. Yeah, if you feel really strongly about something and you want to make a difference, do it and don't worry about whether somebody else thinks.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that it's always challenging when you're a college student to anticipate what's coming, or somehow maybe you think that you should have a grand plan. I think always play to your strengths, always pursue what you really love to do. And no matter what it is, you're always going to find difficulties. Even if you love it, it's going to be difficult. And if it's not difficult, personally, I'd be suspicious. Because if it's too easy, you're probably not working your hardest. So in any way, that's been my philosophy, meaning that I found that when I accomplished something really significant that I could look back to with pride, it was always a struggle when I began, in the middle, and at the end. And sometimes even after I was finished, I wasn't sure if it was good enough, but I had to finally just put it down and say, okay, on to the next. So you also, although it's important to be a perfectionist, it can be a little bit of a detractor, not a thing you want to do. So don't work too hard to the point where you don't let anything go.
That sort of fits in with when you're working on something you really care about, you can get tired, you can get sort of burnt out. So put it aside and come back. That's what I did with this novel all along. And there's also a phrase that authors use called, you have to be willing to kill your darlings. Okay, which means if you've done something you really like, but it doesn't fit. I would write chapters and they were beautiful chapters and they were wonderful. And then they didn't fit into the book. They didn't fit into the narrative. So I had to toss them aside. So you're not going to get everything right to begin with. No, and don't be afraid to put energy into something and then find out that it's not quite fitting. It's not a linear process at all.
Thank you. One more advice question, but rather for the people in the room, for yourselves. What was one thing that you would have told yourself at college age, a piece of advice, or maybe just a tip to get through?
Don't be afraid to aim high.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true, because I did not do that, and it was nobody's fault but my own. So I know what you're talking about. Or it takes you a really long time to get around to doing something you wanted to do, because again, you sort of doubt yourself. There's a story, David McCulloch. No, I'm sorry, it was James Michener. Who was asked, he wrote these grand sweeping historical sagas. And somebody asked me, said, well, are you the best person to do this? And I said, I don't know if I'm the best person, but I'm the person doing it. I'm doing it. So don't let the fact that you're not necessarily the most qualified or whatever discourage you.
Thank you. This next question is for Diana. Can you describe any additional personal perils the Lyman women faced in political, moral, and economic movements that shaped the course of American history?
I would say, well, moral, okay, talk too much. Religion and faith was absolutely, I think, critical to the survival and endurance that all of the people had faced. And it was not easy. So, and I think faith that there was something beyond, that there was a plan, was really critical to them. Economic, one of the things that economic was after the revolution, second generation, David and Sarah Lyman had 10 children. Okay, they were well off, but they weren't well off enough to set up 10 kids in Connecticut, okay, with a livelihood. So they actually ended up investing in land on what was then the frontier of Vermont and New York. And 7 of their kids eventually had to leave home to go out and make their living there. So, the family gets divided up, broken up because of the economic situation.
Thank you. This next question is for Professor Fergatian. Can you share some highlights of your research interests in gender history, food history, and minority communities?
Okay. And you want that in 30 seconds, right? I'll just stick to the food history part because that's something that always perks people's ears up, especially these days. Food history has become quite the thing. My interest began as a purely personal endeavor. In other words, my grandmother was a great cook. I was her only grandchild, so I was around her all the time. So I got to watch her cooking. I got to taste it first, and I like good food. So I recorded her recipes for my daughter. Eventually, that book turned into a memoir cookbook that I call Home Again, Armenian Recipes from the Ottoman Empire. I say this because I'm not trying to sell the book, but the book ended up becoming a cookbook that talks about genocide. And I combined both my personal history with the history of Armenians in Armenia to create something that is unique and I'm quite proud of. Working on that book eventually led me to creating a course that I teach for the UIS program, University Interdisciplinary Studies at the university, which is studying the ancient history of Greece and Rome via food. In other words, food commodities, trade networks, economy, and so on. So I keep combining interests, and one thing leads to another. And I guess that's one way of answering that question.
Thank you. I believe we have time for some more questions. I see that some are coming through the chat, but I did know that someone came on audio as well. I would invite that person. Sorry, I don't have your name. If you want to come off.
That's me.
Your question.
Thank you, ladies. This is just so fascinating. The reason that I originally came on was because the name Lyman meant something to me as a former student of Hartford College for Women, where Christine Lyman was a huge presence. And does she factor in at all in this family story?
Not in the story that I tell. There are a lot of Lymans, okay? The Hartford, I can't remember his name. There's the Theodore Lyman House and the Hartford Club. No, not Hartford Club. Anyway, so they're probably all related. They all come down from a Richard Lyman who settled in Hartford in 1640. He's buried in the ancient burying ground. And then they sort of spread out through Connecticut and down. So they're probably all related somehow, but she wouldn't fit into this particular story.
Well, for me, she does.
Yeah, okay, yes.
Just because of the name. I have another question that's a little bit far out, but when you mentioned the Lyman woman who bought her own land in her own name,
Mhm.
the name Margaret Brent sprang to mind. She was a woman in early Maryland who was a landowner and challenged the law as a landowner that she could vote and that she could do all these
Mhm.
other things. Did that happen with this Lyman woman?
No, no, this is, I mean, it's very early for that kind of thing. And she didn't end up owning a lot, okay? It's just that, as they're moving to Middlefield and they're starting their own home and a new life, she wants to buy this. And she actually, her mother was widowed very early, didn't remarry, raised her kids. And I think she got some of her money to do these kinds of things from her mother, but she also had the example of her mother, who, as I said, ran her household, lived without getting remarried. I think to sort of inspire her with the idea that I want to have a little bit of control, okay? If I can.
This Margaret Brent, by the way, was 17th century, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If anyone would also like to ask any questions, feel free to come off of audio and or put them in the chat as well. I think there was a similar question about the connection with Hartford College for Women. You see that's anyone else?
Christine Lyman, by the way, was a huge force at Hartford College for Women back in the day.
Well, they were the women's, as I said, Lizzie Lyman was William Lyman's daughter. She and Harriet Beecher Stowe were second cousins. Okay. And they went to Hartford Female Seminary, which was founded by Harriet's older sister, Catherine Beecher. So they're pioneering establishing these schools, let alone going there. So Lizzie and Harriet go to school there. They then become teachers at the school. Okay. And then when Lyman Beecher decides that he's going to go out and convert the West, they go out and they start a school in Cincinnati, Western Female Seminary for Women. So they're not just getting an education; they're going out and spreading it to all other kinds of people across the country, really.
I see in the chat that Carol had a question about the powerful role that religion played in the founding of Connecticut, if you could address that.
Connecticut was founded as a Puritan colony. Okay, Puritans were there was the Anglican Church, the Church of England, of which the king was head, and they thought that it had just become completely corrupted. So they wanted to purify the church, get rid of all of the fancy things and all of the rituals and the ceremonies. So they came to Connecticut and Massachusetts, and when they established it, basically everything was, the entire colony was based on Puritanism and the Bible. So it was the foundation of life. And there were things like had to go to school, had to go to church on Sundays. That was required by law. Weren't allowed to do anything else on Sundays. It was a day of rest. So it's really just part of everybody's life. Okay. And I think at times it becomes burdensome. At times it becomes sort of stale. But then there are times when it is really the thing that gets you going, that keeps you going as a community. You were living in farms spread out. Once a week, everybody would gather together and see each other at the meeting house. So it was, again and again, all the trials and tribulations they faced, losing children, losing adult children, all of these things. I think their faith was something that really helped them survive that, helped them get through it.
Because the doctors sure didn't.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
No.
Diana, as a
Yes.
follow-up to that question, as someone who is not Protestant, were there early on any other faiths in the community? And were they respected if they observed a different Sabbath or anything else? Or was it just, this is what it is and you in?
Well, yeah, no, this is what it is. Okay. Connecticut Puritanism, Congregationalism was the established Church of Connecticut until 1818, which meant everybody had to pay taxes to support it.
Right.
Okay. And other denominations, sort of Quakers, no, we don't want to hear anything about Quakers. They did try and make some sheds. The Anglican Church, Church of England, that I was talking about, they started having congregations in Connecticut, in part because Connecticut's a colony of Great Britain. The king or the queen is saying, "This is my church. You can't say they can't have my church." And so there were, but there weren't very many. And you don't really get other denominations, pretty much like Methodist, whatever, until
Catholics, Jews.
no. Jews. Okay. Constitution of 1818, Connecticut. Was the first one that said that any Christians would have their own denomination. Okay. Jews really, I think in the 1840s, they really began to be sort of accepted as having their own congregations. Catholics are middle 1800s. There just aren't any here until the Irish start coming over after the famine. And then, they were allowed to worship. They were Christians. But no, for the first couple hundred years, it was really pretty much either congregational or sort of looked at you suspiciously. No, you had sworn yourself to the, and when the Revolutionary War starts, if you are a member of an Anglican church, people really look at you suspiciously because the king is the earthly head of the church. And so that really divided communities and caused lots of strife.
All right, it looks like we got one more question.
I'll read, Alyssa, I'll read it off. I'll read this question. No problem. So this question's from Emily. Diana, Emily wrote, it was interesting to her that the family was able to come back from almost bankruptcy, having their belongings sold at auction and rise to become one of the wealthiest families in the community twice.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a common possibility in that economy, or were the Lymans particularly resilient?
I think given their history all the way down to the present, I would say they were probably, unusually resilient, because one of the things that you see with the family is they're innovators. They come up with different ways to do things. Again, the idea of I can't support 10 kids here. I'm going to invest in frontier land. Okay.
Right.
They got into industry later on in the 1850s. David Lyman, fourth generation, who was very much into farming and farm, but he started the Metropolitan Washing Machine in Middlefield, which manufactured pretty crude washing machines back then. But it was tremendously successful. So this was another way of, how can we innovate? How can we think of a different way to keep things going? And I think that is really, part of it. I'm not, whether it was reflected so much in the early generations, I don't know, but it was, again, obvious they didn't just roll over and say, that's too bad. Work to bring it back.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. If not, we can turn it back to Amy. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Diana Ross McCain. I loved the book reading it, and I loved it even more hearing you talk about it. So thank you so much. And thank you to Professor Mari Furkatian for moderating the discussion. We love that you are part of the Women's Advancement Initiative family, and thank you for saying yes when we asked. And I also want to point out that Thy Children's Children is available to purchase on Amazon. If you haven't read it yet, it's really worth reading. I just can honestly say that. I also want to thank the lead students who participated tonight, Gina Cordone and Alyssa Hoffman. And I, of course, want to thank my Women's Advancement Initiative team, Sarah Ceruto, who is here and jumped in at the last minute, and then Dina Morris-Liga, who is not with us tonight, but behind the scenes made a lot of what you see happen here. I also want to thank Sam Willett, who is the behind the scenes unsung hero. If I could only do events where, Sam, you are part of it, I would do that if I could. I now want to thank the Hartford College for Women class of 1970 50th Reunion Planning Committee and show you their yearbook pictures on the screen to bring back some memories. So thank you to Jan and Rebecca and Shirley and Linda and Cindy. It has genuinely been a pleasure to work with you. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. 16 Hartford College for Women alums from 11 class years and lead students from all 4 class years. I'm so glad we were all here together. And I want to just end by saying that 2023 is the 90th anniversary of the founding of Hartford College for Women, originally in 1933 as a noble experiment as Mount Holyoke in Hartford. And I think many of you, or at least some of you, were with us a few years ago when we celebrated 85 years of educating women in Hartford. We plan to do the same thing in the fall of 2023 to celebrate Hartford College for Women and 90 years of educating women. Last time we had decade captains and we invited people to share memories and then host the welcoming tables. So if anyone is interested, I would love to have a chance to work more closely with you. Working with Hartford College for Women legacy and helping to keep your story and legacy alive for today's students is honestly one of the most satisfying parts of the work that I do. So I want to say thank you to everyone. If you want to be in touch, in the email, there was contact information, so you know where to find us. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night, and happy Thanksgiving. Take care, everyone.